Okay, so finally, now that we've done the audio check, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this webinar on how to pre-think assumptions. My name is Rajat Sedana. I'm one of the co-founders of e-GMAT, and I'm going to be your main host today. Supporting me in this webinar is Harsha, who's a senior subject matter expert, and he is going to be a co-host, as well as Sandeep, who's a senior strategy expert, and he's going to help us answer your GMAT strategy related questions if you have any during this webinar. I absolutely love this webinar. As a GMAT instructor who's been teaching pre-thinking for the last decade, this is one webinar that I don't get tired of, and there's something new to learn from, even for me, from this webinar. So in this webinar, we're going to talk about this very misunderstood method called pre-thinking. We're going to really demonstrate how, by using pre-thinking, you can solve each and every easy, medium, or hard question that the test is likely to throw at you. It's a fairly application-focused webinar, which means that we do expect that you guys have some sort of an idea of what a premise, a conclusion is. Ideally, if you've gone through some of the prerequisite files that we sent across your way, that would have been ideal. That would help you actually push through the hard questions in this webinar. But if you've not gone through those files, they're on the top right-hand corner. They're also a part of your free trial. So do go through them post this session. They would actually enhance or amplify the learnings that you've had from this webinar. So the three files that we have, top left-hand corner, Introduction to Assumptions, very foundation file. We're going to touch some foundations here, but that takes that foundation to that next level. And the pre-thinking, two types, pre-thinking on two architectures of arguments, the ones that test your ability to identify logical gaps versus the one that tests your ability to identify the logical comparison between two entities. So make sure you go through them post this webinar if you've not gone through these. Also, we have some upcoming free webinars. We have a geometry session that's tomorrow, and this session is going to be hosted by Payal, who's a top instructor, actually #1 ranked instructor on GMAT Club. So this is, Payal usually doesn't host sessions. This is one of the few instances when she'll be hosting that session. So if you've not registered for that, definitely register for that. And then next week we have a strategy webinar in which we're going to talk about, how do you build that personalized study plan? Once you have that personalized study plan, how do you go about executing that? And then what metrics should you track? Again, we'll take various case studies. We'll take actual successful GMAT journeys, and we're going to show how to plan your GMAT journey. Also, this week, so we have a student, one of our former students, who's coming back to give, and she's going to talk about how she got into Columbia and INSEAD, and so she's going to talk about the role that not only just her GMAT score played, but also her profile and the interview, and how did she go about getting those letters of recommendation and those other things. Anyone who's applying in round 1, I think should attend this webinar. It's on 4th of August on our YouTube channel. All right, let me hide this. So with that, let's get to know you guys a bit better. So I want to figure out what's your target GMAT score and when do you guys plan to take the test. Hold on. Let's put this piece over here. If you can respond to this other poll question, that'd be wonderful. Okay, and all right, so when do people plan to take the test? 37% of you have not taken a date as of yet. That's about 56. We have another 20% who have a month and a half or more before their test, and then about 43-44% of you have your test in the next 45 days or so. Some of you actually have your test right away. Let me hide that poll and your target GMAT scores. The biggest group over here in that 730 to 750 segment, we have a significant number who that's aiming for that 760 or higher, and then we have about 31% in the 710, 720 group, and essentially no one in the 600 to 650, and about 8% of you, or about 8 of you in the 600 to 700. Thank you very much. So with that, let's go into the webinar pane. The screen at this point should be in the process of transitioning over, or or will have changed for you. Let me put in a poll question to see if you guys can see the screen. If you guys can see that screen which says Prethinking for Assumptions, select yes. All right, pretty much everyone can see that. That's wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to move this poll question away. So just some logistics here. What you see on top is what we call as a presentation pod. At the bottom, we have a Q&A pod. This is a Q&A pod for your questions. So during the webinar, you have a doubt about what I'm talking about, you can post that question over here, and that's why Harsha and Sandeep are here. They can respond to those questions. You also see this empty space on the right-hand side, and this is for the questions that I ask you. So during this webinar, I'm going to ask you about 15 to 20, probably 30 questions, and the best ways that you can get most out of this webinar is by participating. You're spending the time. When you participate, you get feedback that's personalized to you. You know what you're doing right. You know where you need to improve. And so on the right hand side, I'm going to put in various kinds of poll questions. Some of them short answer type where you have to type in, others where you have to select one out of the given choices, and in some cases you can select more than one choices. So essentially participate, and you're going to find that this webinar is a lot more fun. Now this webinar is about 2 hours and 15 minutes long, so if you don't participate, it will get boring. One other logistical item in this case, so this is a reasonably heavy webinar, which means that, because we'll be doing a lot of application level processing. So I recommend that you guys have two things, a notebook with a pen, and then a bottle of water with you. Usually if you have that, you're able to write things down and you process them better. Of course, I'll be providing the presentation in the end, but if you write things down during the webinar, you'll process them better. Okay. So with that, I want to just talk about a couple of other things. Now, in this webinar, we're going to talk about pre-thinking. And typically, when you go to a certain session, where someone's teaching you a method, they would, in the context of GMAT, they would typically say, hey, I'm going to teach you a method that will help you answer questions in less than 2 minutes. They play on time. We don't do any of that. Has anyone attended a session like this where you say, hey, I'm going to teach you a method that will help you answer questions really quickly? Yes, no one has attended such a webinar? No one has attended? Well, that's good. Then that's wonderful for me. So I just want to set in this. This is a fairly method-based webinar, which means our goal at e-GMAT is not to teach you methods that shortcut the process. Our goal at e-GMAT is to teach you the right way to answer questions, and when you know the right way to answer questions, your timing takes place by itself. So most of our students who use the right methods don't struggle for time. In fact, when you go through pre-thinking, what you're going to find is that initially you take longer to solve questions. The method will seem longer to you, but if you persist through it, you're going to find two things will happen. One is you're going to get a high ability score. The second is you're going to save time answering questions. Okay. Now there are three parts of this webinar. I want to talk a bit about your MBA and your GMAT journey. That's going to be the first 6 minutes or so. And the reason why I want to do that is because this pre-thinking method is very different from what you've seen elsewhere. So I want to just make sure that you have that belief, and then we're going to go right into the core of the session over here. So that's going to be our session. Essentially, this third part here is optional. This is what I call as the open-ended Q&A, which means that, hey, post this session if you have questions about your GMAT preparation, things that we're not going to talk about in the webinar directly. You can post those questions in this time. If you have questions about your MBA, you can post those questions during this time as well. Okay. So essentially at e-GMAT, we do things, as I said, very differently from what most people do. And to explain that difference, I'm going to talk about the learning architectures that exist today and the architecture that we follow versus what other people follow. So if you think about learning architectures today, there are two dominant architectures that exist in the world. One is what we call as a book-based architecture, and the second is a private tutoring-based architecture. Book-based architecture, a much more linear architecture, an architecture where you get a lot less feedback, you do a lot less course correction. A private tutoring-based architecture, way more personalized, way more, has a lot more feedback built in, has a lot more course correction built in over there. I mean, that's why it's called a private tutoring. You have actually an individual who looks at your strengths and weaknesses. And then at e-GMAT, we actually follow this private tutoring-based architecture when we design our courses. And just to really tell you how that manifests itself and how that makes your GMAT preparation different, let's kind of talk about how do you build a study plan. So when you think about creating a study plan where you're aiming for that score of 720 or higher, just in that study plan creation process, you have to go through this journey. One is you've got to figure out, hey, how am I going to get to that score of 720? Which means, hey, what ability scores am I aiming for in quant? Within quant, what ability scores am I aiming for in arithmetic and algebra, geometry? Similarly, on the verbal side, what are the optimal ability scores that I need in SCCR and RC to get to my target verbal score? And so you've got to really figure that out. You figure that out based on what you currently know. Each one of you is unique. You have certain strengths, you have certain weaknesses. Based on that, you figure out those ability scores. Now, when you do that, you also get a list of areas where you need to invest your time, and that's where you learn all the concepts that you don't know today and that you need to learn, and you learn how to apply those concepts. Okay, and then you track your performance to such a degree that you attain that level of mastery that puts you in that top, 2, 3, 5 percentile of students worldwide, which is depending on the score that you're aiming for. Okay. So let's kind of talk about how at e-GMAT we look at creating that first step, which is I'm going to focus just on this block, creating a path to your goal. Okay, so we're gonna take a student who's starting at a score of 600 and wants to get to a score of 720. So at e-GMAT, when we think about building your study plan, we actually do a 3-step process. We quantify what your strengths and weaknesses are. That's what quantifying your starting abilities means. Then, based on how the GMAT works, we've created an AI-driven tool that helps you define the optimum milestones for you. If you want to aim for 720, there are about 30 ways in which you can get to a 720 score. This tool defines the right way for you, the best possible way, where you have the highest possible likelihood to succeed, and where the time to get there is also in what I call as the optimum set, or towards the lower amount. And then we personalize learning, which means, most people do about 50% of the e-GMAT course because of what they already know. So we then say, hey, this is the 50% that you need to learn. Okay. So how do you get your starting abilities? We have a mock test called a Sigma X mock. It's the world's only mock test that gives you an ESR-like analysis, which means it gives you your ability scores. It tells you why you faltered, what kind of questions you're faltering on, not just SCCR and RC, but within SCCR and RC, or within arithmetic, number properties, word problems, algebra, geometry. Essentially, what difficulty level are you faltering and why are you faltering? And when you have those ability scores, we then enter those ability scores into our PSP that actually gives out your optimal ability score. So this is a screenshot of PSP where you enter your quant and verbal scores. These are your starting scores. It then generates your target quant and verbal scores for a 720 score. And then it tells you to get to a 720, it takes in your starting abilities on quant side and on verbal side, and it generates target abilities for you to reach a V38 or a Q50. And then it generates a plan, a weekly plan for you, where here are your starting abilities that you got from Sigma X. These are the ones on the left. These are the target milestones that PSP suggested. And this is the amount of time that you should be spending, for example, in arithmetic, in algebra, in CR over here, and so on and so on. And I know you guys can't read this, but this is information written in weeks over here. And it then generates a day-by-day plan over here, takes into account how much time you can put it on weekends versus how much time you can put it on weekdays, and accordingly. So you have a clear idea of where you're starting from, when you're starting from, and essentially how long you need to study each of these subsections over here. Okay, this is something that we usually offer this with our free sessions as a service to really say, hey, if you want to get a study plan, then you can schedule a call with one of our strategy experts. I think we have about 20 slots available. You can do that. Okay. Again, the methods that we talk about are going to be fairly different. So I want to add some belief. I want to talk about the kind of success that we have delivered. People usually look at two things that when it comes to success. One is how many people have appreciated you. That's a number of reviews. And when you look at verified reviews that have been posted on GMAT Club since 2016, what you're going to find is our students have posted more reviews than our students from all of these prep companies. In fact, even if when you add them up, we still have more reviews. But then what about 700 plus scores. What about more recently? So if you look at data between January and June, and these are just 700 plus scores that have been posted on GMAT Club and verified using an actual score report, we've delivered more 700 plus scores than any other company. In fact, the only company that has delivered any significant number of 700 plus scores other than us is TTP. Other than that, and this includes all the other partners that are not listed, we've delivered 10 times as many 700 plus scores as the average GMAT Club partner. Okay, yeah, so and these are one of the other things that that we do is we post our student success stories on our YouTube channel. We post about 2 success stories a week on our YouTube channel. Most other companies, if you go to their YouTube channel, you'd see 1 success story every 2 months. We do post 2 a week. That's how passionate our students are. Okay, with that, if you want to stay connected with all things e-GMAT, connect with me on LinkedIn, and you can search for me on LinkedIn and connect with me. We post about 5 articles every week on GMAT preparation, and so that will help you essentially stay updated with all things that go on in the MBA world. Here's a link to my LinkedIn account. Okay. With that, let's get to the core of this webinar. I'm going to actually hide this. So here's the agenda for this. We're going to start by how do you approach critical reasoning today. Then we're going to do a pre-thinking exercise in which we will go through about 3 arguments. And again, these are pure arguments with the exception of the third one where you'll have answer choices. The first 2 are pure arguments. And the goal of the first 2 arguments will be that you understand the process of pre-thinking, you understand what an assumption is, and then we'll solve 2 really difficult questions. These are 700, 750 level questions, 2 of the probably the most challenging questions the challenging kind of questions that you're going to see on the test. We'll do them as a quiz, which means you'll solve these 2 questions together, and then we'll do a detailed review. Again, the entire purpose of this exercise throughout this webinar is to make sure you understand what pre-thinking is, how to apply it, and how it helps cut through the clutter that the answer choices present to you. Okay, and then towards the end we'll look at, okay, now that you've gone through pre-thinking, now that you have a fair understanding of what pre-thinking is, what should you do next? How can you really take your ability to pre-think to that next level, and where should you evaluate yourself? Okay. At a very high level, we'll document how you prepare today, recognize what's important to excel in assumption questions, and then give you a path. Okay. So with that, let's talk about your current approach to critical reasoning, and let me put in a poll question here. So I'm going to present 2 methodologies very soon, but before that, let's talk about what pre-thinking is, because people have a very wrong notion of what pre-thinking is. When we talk about pre-thinking, in a critical reasoning argument, pre-thinking is thinking of one assumption in your mind before you start looking at answer choices. Now, the words in quotes are really important. They are critical to that essence of pre-thinking. An argument can have multiple assumptions. We are not trying to figure out all the assumptions that the argument can have. We are only trying to figure out one potential assumption here. The second thing is you've got to do pre-thinking before you take a look at the answer choices. Why? Because answer choices in critical reasoning questions provide new information that pollute your mind. And if once you start reading those answer choices, you no longer have a pristine idea of what the argument's talking about. So you can actually throw pre-thinking out of the window the moment you start looking at the answer choices. And this is important. Why? Because one of the first things that students struggle with when it comes to learning pre-thinking is to stop themselves from looking at the answer choices. You've got to learn how to do that. Now, when you start doing pre-thinking, you might take 2 minutes or 3 minutes to even think about one assumption, but once you become a skilled pre-thinker, should be able to do that in 15 seconds or fewer. Okay, and this is really important. All these 3 aspects are really important. Why? Because typically, if you think about the word pre-thinking, it has existed way before e-GMAT existed, but pretty much most people think of pre-thinking as predicting the answer. No, with pre-thinking, our goal is to understand the logic that the author is using to arrive at the conclusion. We are not trying to predict the answer. And so that's where I want to make this clear, that Pre-thinking is not that black magic where you look at the argument and say, hey, this is what's going to be in the answer choices. No, it's about making sure that you comprehend the logic that the author is using. And that's where we define this as precisely. We're the first company to come up with this definition of pre-thinking. Before this, everyone thought pre-thinking is about predicting the answer. Okay. Now, how do you solve a CR question today? There are two methods here. Method one is you read the argument, you look at the answer choices, and you do a back and forth before you actually narrow down to the target option. The second is the pre-thinking approach, where you read the argument, you pre-think, and then look at the answer choices, coming back to the argument only when you need to come back. So today, if I were to ask you, how do you go about solving assumption questions? Okay, let's get a few more responses. I have about 75 responses, 80 responses, 90 responses. Let's get to 100 responses over here. Okay, we have about 100 responses. It's really interesting that half the people do pre-thinking, the other half do not. My goal today would be, if you are in camp number 2, you should become a better pre-thinker. You should know the reason why you're here is most likely because you want to become a better pre-thinker. So my goal is to push you further on that journey. If you are in this camp, I want to increase your belief in doing pre-thinking. I want to invite you guys to try pre-thinking. Okay. With that, let's kind of talk about what skills we need to become a better pre-thinker. One of the most important skills in critical reasoning, and again, this doesn't apply just to critical reasoning, it applies to all the things that pretty much every subsection of the GMAT is a skill to visualize. And let's kind of talk about what visualization really means. So when you read an assumption, when you read an argument, or when you read a conclusion, if the conclusion says, hey, a majority of people who are vaccinated do not pass on coronavirus. So visualization means when you read that statement, you kind of assume, you kind of think about a group of 100 people, and you really say, okay, divide that group into two parts, one smaller, one larger, and you say, okay, the smaller part passes on coronavirus, that's kind of where the minority passes on coronavirus, the majority does not. So doing that visualization is really essential. If the conclusion is a claim where it says, hey, the seawall is going to be able to sustain the surge in waves, or the attack of waves. So you kind of imagine a seawall, imagine large waves coming in, and the seawall sustaining through those waves. Why is that important? Because in critical reasoning, you typically have words that lead to segmentation. You typically have words that actually sometimes go into extremes. And if you don't visualize, and if you read through things, you will actually miss those words. You will miss the context of those words. And when you do that, you make mistakes. The second, has anyone done that? Made mistakes because, hey, you read through a statement without recognizing what that statement actually meant. And once you look at the answer choices, you say, hey, I got 80% of the stuff right, but I missed those 2 or 3 words. And because of that, I got it wrong. Okay. So that's really important. Majority of you, 90% of you have done that. When you start visualizing things, 2 things will happen. You will not make, or you'll make way fewer of such mistakes. I won't say you would not, but the number of such mistakes that you make would go down significantly. The second thing is, CR arguments won't feel heavy to you. You would start loving critical reasoning. The second piece you need to do is you need to connect statements. So a critical reasoning argument is really well built. So you need to be able to look at how the pieces fit together, and which means that as you visualize conclusion, as you visualize answer choices, as you visualize statements, connecting them will become much easier, and you'd be able to really figure out, okay, that's why the author talks about this conclusion, and that's the basis of it, and I can understand that. And then the last piece, which is probably the easiest if you do visualization and if you understand the logical structure, is formulating this falsification question. That's probably the easiest thing. Is there anyone over here who's tried pre-thinking and is struggling with pre-thinking? Anyone over here who's tried and is struggling or is not as good? The reason many of you are, the reason why you're struggling is because you're struggling either here or either here. It's not the pre-thinking question. It's not this part here. It's because of one or two. And that's kind of what we're going to build throughout the session, the ability to visualize and the ability to formulate that logical structure or understand the author's logic. Okay, so with that, let's kind of figure out what an assumption is. And I'm going to give you a very, very simple argument. And one thing that I want to prove through this argument is that most of us can visualize really well. Most of us can figure out assumptions really well if we internalize the argument. So this is an argument that's really close to your heart. You think about this every day. So for you, it should be a cakewalk to visualize it. And because you can visualize it, you should be able to come up with assumptions fairly easily. And that's kind of pre-thinking. So here's the argument over here. So take a moment and write down your answers in the short answer pod. I'm going to remove broadcast results. So till I get 30 answers, then I'm going to broadcast your. Oh, sorry about that. Sorry about that. I had muted myself. So just let me repeat myself. I don't know why others didn't tell me. So what does the author tell you over here? So the author actually gives you a data point. He says, hey, Joe scored 500 on the GMAT. And then the author, based on that data point, makes a claim. He says, hey, therefore Joe is actually a prediction that Joe will not get admission in an Ivy League college. And when you think about this prediction, he's actually making a jump in logic, and that jump in logic is the assumption that he's putting in place. And what is the assumption? A score of 500 for someone like Joe is unacceptable to Ivy League colleges. Now the key piece over here, you've got most of it, is this part, someone like Joe. Because the author's conclusion is about Joe, the assumption has to relate to a group of people like Joe. His conclusion is not saying, the author is not saying the Prince of Saudi Arabia will not get admission in an Ivy League college. He's saying Joe will not get admission in an Ivy League college. So with that, I think the thing that's fairly clear is if you internalize, if you can visualize an argument, get into an assumption or pre-thinking an assumption is a natural exercise. So as long as we can visualize an argument, we should be able to pre-think an assumption. Now with that, can you guys tell me what's the definition of an assumption? Can you write down what is an assumption? Can you type it out? Let's get a few more responses. I want to see what's the precise definition of an assumption. And critical reasoning is and again, if you guys hate physics, don't kill me. But critical reasoning is a lot like physics. There aren't a ton of rules. There are very few rules in critical reasoning. If you understand those rules, you can pretty much solve any question that the test will throw at you. Okay, and this is, as you read this, you can really see there are multiple variations of what people think an assumption is. Some of them say it's an unstated truth. Some say new information that must always be true for the conclusion to hold true. That's good. Something not mentioned but supports the conclusion. So you guys have an idea of what an assumption is. Some of you precisely know what an assumption is, but many of you do not. Okay. So an assumption is an unstated idea, which means you can't infer it from the argument, an unstated idea that must be true, or which means that's required for the conclusion to be valid. Okay. This is the precise definition of an assumption. This is something that I want you to write down. Why? Because as we solve questions, you're going to make some mistakes, and I'm going to ask you to recite this definition again. As you recite this definition, you're going to figure out why you chose the wrong answer choice. Why is that answer choice wrong? Why does it not satisfy the must be true criteria, or why is that not providing any new information? So this means the correct assumption satisfies two characteristics. One is that it provides information that you can't infer, and the second thing is it satisfies this must be true condition. Okay, so you guys are asking what type of CR questions can you implement pre-thinking? Pretty much every kind, barring inference. You can actually use pre-thinking in pretty much every question. We actually use pre-thinking in about 80% of inference questions too, but in every other type of question, and 100% of those questions you can use pre-thinking. Okay. So coming back to this, at e-GMAT, we love to visualize things, and when it comes to definitions, it's really important to visualize this. So I'm going to actually present a visual to you. Think of this argument to be this house over here. Now this house has a roof. Think of that roof to be a conclusion, and you have these three pillars. Each one of these three pillars is a supporting statement, okay, or what we call them as premises. Now, if you think about how a house is built, not all pillars in the house are required to keep the roof upright. There are some pillars that are what we call as load-bearing or essential pillars. Others are not. Your assumption is very similar to that essential pillar. So out of these three, maybe only the center one is required to keep the roof upright, and that center one is essentially that essential pillar or that assumption. Without this, if you remove this central pillar, this roof will cave in over here. So that is how you should think about an assumption. And the reason why I'm saying that is because a lot of you actually when I talked about what is the definition of an assumption, you said it's a statement that's not stated, and that supports the conclusion. Yes, an assumption does that, but so do these two pillars. It's not stated. They support the roof. They make the roof stronger, but they're not essential pillars. If you remove these pillars, as long as this pillar is present, the roof will continue to stay upright. And that's the difference between a strengthener, which is what these pillars are, and an assumption, which is what this pillar is. In other words, every assumption is a strengthener. Every strengthener is not an assumption. And for those of you who don't know what a strengthener is, don't bother. That part is not relevant to you. But for those of you who know what a strengthener is, just this distinction is really important. Why is that important? Because as we solve questions, the answer choices that will confuse you will be the ones that strengthen the conclusion, but they're not that necessary or that essential pillar. So think about a house, think about the roof being the conclusion and that essential pillar. being there to make sure that the roof doesn't cave in. Okay. If you translate this into words, what it means is that if the information provided by assumption is not true, then the conclusion can break down. There's a means to destroy the conclusion. So that assumption is that pillar that prevents the roof from caving in. Does that visualization help? If you can type in yes or no, that'd be very helpful. Okay. Okay. So let's kind of look at what does it mean when it comes to falsification of conclusion. And we're going to keep on using this argument itself for the next 10 minutes. And because I think it's a great way to illustrate the basics of what assumption is. So there's the same argument. Joe scored 500 on the GMAT, and the author makes a prediction he will not get admission in an Ivy League college. And thank you very much for that feedback. So when you think about this, what does falsification of conclusion means, or in what scenario will this conclusion get destroyed? This conclusion will get destroyed if Joe scores 500 and he still gets admission in an Ivy League college. Okay, right? If that happens, the author is falsified. The author's claim, this part is no longer true. Okay, so let's see how do we use that definition of an assumption to evaluate whether an answer choice is correct. Okay, we like this answer choice. This is what we came up with, and we said this is the correct assumption, and let's see if it satisfies the must be true condition. So the question that we ask is that must be true? Will Joe get admission if this answer choice no longer holds true? So this is something which is new learning for you. When you say a statement is no longer true, by definition, what you're also saying is that its negated version is true. Okay, if you say X is not true, by definition, what you're saying is not X is true. And I'm going to prove that to you in a minute. Okay, so when you say if this is not true, then by definition, what you're really saying is this is true, that a score of 500 on the GMAT for someone like Joe is acceptable to Ivy League colleges. So if this statement becomes true, then what happens to my conclusion? It's absolutely destroyed. Why? Because if this score becomes acceptable, then I as the author cannot make this claim with 100% certainty that Joe will not get admission into an Ivy League college. Okay, so can you really see how the negated instance of my correct answer choice destroys my conclusion? Can you see that? How this statement makes my argument invalid, or the author's conclusion invalid. Yes, no, type it out. Okay. Now, many of you are thinking, how can you say, this is essentially what we do when we apply the negation test, by the way, for those of you who've heard what the negation test is. So many of you are saying, how can you say if a statement is not true, its negated version automatically becomes true? And this is where I want you to play along for 30 seconds with me. Okay. So when someone says Harvard has the best MBA program, if you say that's not true, automatically what you're saying is that Harvard does not have the best MBA program, or that an MBA program that's better than or just as good as Harvard exists. Are you not saying that if you say this is not true? Are you not saying this piece? Right? So when a statement is not true, you're saying its negated version. By definition, you're saying its negated version becomes true. Or in other words, if you say John runs faster than David, and if you say that's not true, then it means that, hey, David is just as fast, or David could also be faster than John. By definition, you're saying that if you say this statement is not true. Okay. So just when you say a statement is not true, by definition, you're saying its negated version is true. Okay. So if the answer choice is the correct assumption, then the conclusion will break down in the presence of the negated version of that answer choice. Why does that work? Why? Because it works from the definition of an assumption. An assumption is that unstated idea that is required, or that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. In other words, what we are really saying is, think of what that negated version of that answer choice is. It's actually removing the essential pillar from the house. What's going to happen when you remove the essential pillar from the house? The roof is going to cave in. That's what conclusion breakdown means. Okay. It also works the other way, which is if the answer choice is the incorrect answer choice, then you'd find that the conclusion will not break down in the presence of negated instance. Or in other words, you remove a non-essential pillar, the roof will continue to stay upright. And let's take that let's take an example with the same argument. And in this case, the statement that we are evaluating, or the answer choice that we are evaluating, is this one, which is the score of 500 on the GMAT is not a good score. Okay, so that's given in the answer choices to you, and you have to figure out, is that the correct answer? Okay, so let's evaluate. So we're going to follow the same process. Is this my correct answer? Will the conclusion become invalid if this statement is no longer true? Which means its negated version becomes true, which means the score of 500 on the GMAT becomes a good score. Say, hey, if that score of 500 is a good score, then does my conclusion break down? And the answer to this is absolutely not. Why? Because when the author makes his claim, he doesn't really predicate that claim or on what the score of 500 is called. In other words, you might replace 500 by 700. The argument will continue to stand. Okay, so this proves that, hey, you can remove this pillar, the roof will continue to stand, or this is not an essential pillar, or this is not a must be true statement. Okay, I'm gonna actually skip this part. So, and this was what I call as a foundation of what an assumption is and how you go about reading an argument. Now, this is a very simple argument. We're going to now move a gear higher, or a couple of gears higher, and we're going to solve some more challenging arguments. In fact, I want you guys to help me solve some more challenging arguments. Again, the skills that we want to build are the skills to visualize the conclusion, the skill to understand the author, that the logic that the author uses, and then we're going to formulate the question. Doing that must be true a test that helps you narrow down. For the correct answer choice, as is written over here, the conclusion will not hold true when you negate this, or it'll break down. The roof will cave in. For the incorrect answer choice, the roof will continue to stay strong. Okay, so let's kind of learn how to pre-think, and I want you guys to really try and figure out how to go about doing pre-thinking before I actually tell you. So the process that we're going to follow is, I'm going to give you an argument. This time it's going to be a bit more sophisticated argument. I want you to put in your pre-thinking. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. Actually, it says 2. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. So go through the argument really slowly. Use a pen and paper, and we're going to record your answers in this short answer poll on the right hand side. Okay. Then we're going to look at my pre-thinking, and then we'll evaluate some submissions. All right. So here's the argument. Do you guys have a pen and paper ready? I know you guys can see this. Do you have a pen and paper ready? Yes? No? Perfect. Okay. With that, I'm going to clear all answers and remove broadcast results. And here is the argument. There are no answer choices. What you have to figure out is, what does the author assume over here? Good luck, guys. I'm going to mute my mic for 3 minutes. You have 3 minutes to tell me, what does the author assume here? All right, guys, 30 seconds. Get those answers in. Come on. All right, get those answers in. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So I'm going to broadcast results. You guys can still continue to put answers in, but you can really see we have some really interesting answers. About I think 20 responses right now, and I'd say about 5 of them are really high quality, which is wonderful. Typically in a session such as this, I get about 3 or 4 high quality responses. Here I've gotten about 5 high quality responses that I've read so far. And that's really good. It's just you guys are a smarter bunch is all I can say. Okay. So let's see, and you guys can continue reading what others are putting in. Let's see how to approach pre-thinking. The first step you've got to do when it comes to approaching pre-thinking is figure out what the conclusion is. You've got to isolate and then visualize that conclusion. Then we build that logical structure, which is our second step, which is, hey, what's the reasoning that the author uses to arrive at the conclusion? And then the third step is we ask what we call as the falsification question or the pre-thinking question. And as we do that, after we've done step 1 and 2, you'd see assumptions start to jump out at you. So let's see how do we go about doing that. Okay. So again, how do we pre-think assumptions? What's that falsification question? It's a very simple question that comes from that definition of assumption. Remember, an assumption said, what is an assumption? An assumption is an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid, which means without the assumption, our conclusion will break down, which means my assumption is built around scenarios in which the conclusion breaks down. Okay, so to figure out what an assumption is, let's figure out those scenarios in which the conclusion breaks down. An assumption simply is going to say those scenarios are not possible. So we call these scenarios our breakdown scenarios. So find an assumption. Let's just figure out where how to invalidate the conclusion. If we can figure that out, then figuring out assumptions simply is such scenarios are not possible. Okay, why? Because that's the job of an assumption. Okay, so the falsification question that we want to ask is, under what circumstances, given the information in the argument, will the conclusion break down? So make sure you write this question. This is so that I've told you this is the second thing I've asked you to write down. One was that definition of assumption. Second is this falsification question, because regardless of the argument type, this question is going to remain the same. Okay, why? Because it stems from the very definition of what an assumption is. So with that, let's go through the process. Here's the argument, and I've divided this argument into 3 individual statements. I want you to tell me which statement is the main conclusion. Okay, I have this poll now. This one has 4 statements. Please focus on using the first 3 only, because I use this poll for a bunch of other things. So tell me, according to you, which statement is the main conclusion? Let's get a few more responses. You've done this. Which statement is the main conclusion? Let's get about 60 responses here. I have actually more than 60 now. So let me broadcast results. And what you see is, and let me end the poll. You see that about 58% of you think statement 2 is the main conclusion, and that's absolutely correct. But then 42% of you are wrong in identifying the conclusion. So when you make a mistake, you've got to figure out where did you go wrong, and then being able to identify the conclusions really, really important. In an argument, the conclusion is what the author wants you to believe. And if you read this argument, what the author wants you to believe is statement number 2. What does the statement say? It says the difference between professors in the tenure system and other full-time lecturers has to do with the reward system for the former. former is the reward system for the professors over here. A lot of people think that statement 1 is the main conclusion, and you saw that in the poll. Why? Because it has this word called concludes. Now, remember this, that in an argument, the conclusion is always by the author. In this case, this conclusion is made by this research paper. So it can't be the conclusion. In fact, statement 1 is a fact or a data point where the author simply lists that there is this research paper that's giving you this piece of information that tenured professors enhance student learning less than full-time lecturers do. Some people think statement 3 is the main conclusion. Why? Because it's towards the end of the argument. Now, that's not the case necessarily. In many cases it is. The last statement is the main conclusion because the author presents facts and then provides a conclusion. But you have to understand the role played by statements, and which is where, when you think about why has the author placed statement 3 over here, it is to make statement 2 more believable. So statement 3 is a statement that strengthens statement 2. Statement 2 is what the author wants you to take away from this argument. That's the main idea or the reason behind writing this argument. So for those of you who got this wrong, hopefully this is clear to you. So now let's visualize this conclusion. That's really important. Okay. So here, if I were to visualize this, what I would really look at this is I would look at students where you can enhance the student learning from levels 1 to 10, and I'd compare two entities, professors and then full-time lecturers, and I say, hey, maybe full-time lecturers enhance student learning up to level 8 out of those 10s, and then professors, so this is where you put 8 over here, and professors only enhance it to level 5. They don't go to level 8. And then you say professors have a certain reward system that's given to them, and that is somehow impacting this number 5 over there. So that's how I would visualize just this statement, just to really make sure that the information sticks, and that 5 and 8 gives me that comparative sense over here. Now, should you have a 10 level system? Should you have a 100 level system? Just depends on what you're comfortable with. As long as you're visualizing, that's all that matters. Okay. Another piece that's really important is he's not disputing what you read in statement number 1, which is that report stated that full-time lecturers do a better job than professors do. He's not disputing the report's finding. He's simply blaming that reward system for it. He's saying this is because of that damn reward system. Okay, so this is the main conclusion. This is what the author is trying to make you believe, statement number 2, and then this is your supporting statement. All right. And this one is the context. This information is the basis for the argument that's written. Now, I want to ask you this. I want to talk about statement number 3 over here. So whose reward system, and let's move this poll out of this, whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? Let's get in the poll over here. And this is really important. Why? Because if you don't understand these aspects of the argument, you won't really be able to get to it. Whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? Is it just tenured faculty? Is it just lecturers? Is it both of them? Or is it neither? And this is, again, even before we do pre-thinking, reading and comprehending is really important. Let's get to 60 responses again. Whose reward system are we talking about in statement 3? I have 43 I have 60 odd responses. Actually, I have close to 70 responses. That's wonderful. Let me end the poll and broadcast the results. And a majority have gotten this right. It's just about tenured faculty. And you can see about 19% of you think it's about both of them. And about 4% of you think that it's just lecturers. Okay. Now, was this as clear to you when you were reading the argument by yourself that this only talks about the reward system for tenured faculty? Was it as clear to you when you were doing this argument yourself? Okay, perfect. That's there. If that's, for some of you it wasn't, for some of you it is not, but I think the emphasis over here is that when you read, slow down as you read, because you want to make sure you get this piece over here. This statement only tells us what kind of a structure of the reward system for this one entity, tenured faculty. It gives us absolutely no information about the reward system for full-time lecturers. Okay. So we're going to ask this pre-thinking question again, which says, under what circumstances, given the facts and the argument, will the conclusion break down? let's translate this question into the context of this argument, which is, under what circumstances would the reward system not be responsible for the difference in performance, given that full-time lecturers rarely do a better job than professors do, and the reward system for professors places a greater emphasis on research than on teaching. Both of these are data points. Can you really see how we took this template and translated this into this particular question? What we are saying is, under what circumstances can you not blame the reward system? We are trying to figure out in what scenarios can the conclusion break down. That's all that we are doing. And then to break down the conclusion, we have to blame something else other than the reward system. Can you see that? Just type in a yes. Okay, why does work for me? All right, so let's ask this question again. Under what circumstances will the reward system not cause a difference between the performance? Okay, and then you do that, you actually get two answers. One is, hey, if the other entity, non-tenured professors, have a similar reward system, or the reward system is identical to tenured, then you can't blame the reward system. Do you agree? Do you agree? If both the entities have the same reward system, you can't blame it, right? The second thing is, yes, the tenured faculty has this reward system. If they don't care about rewards, if they don't act as per the reward system, then also you can't blame the reward system. Okay, if a majority of them don't act as per the reward system. Okay, so with that, if these are the scenarios in which my roof caves in, if these are the scenarios in which my conclusion breaks down, then what are my assumptions? Non-tenured professors cannot have an identical reward system, and most tenured faculty has to care about it. Okay. Can you see how these assumptions are different from the assumptions? Some of you actually got it right, but many of you, the kind of assumptions that you would put in were not as simple or were not along the same lines. Can you see that first of all? And the second thing that can you see that how when you ask this question, getting to these scenarios becomes a lot more simple. It's not still, super simple yet, because you're still building that skill, but it has the ease with which you can come up with this is a lot more simple when you ask this question. Can you guys see that? Okay, now we're going to build on this. This was just an introduction to pre-thinking, and let's build on this moving forward. And for those of you saying no, you're going to believe that again. Okay, I'm going to explain the same method with 3 or 4 more arguments, so don't worry if you still don't get it. So with that, I'm going to talk about something else, pre-thinking and timing. How many of you are concerned about timing so far? Saying, man, this seems very long. Right? A lot of you are concerned about timing. Okay. And before I talk about timing, I want to just show this chart once again. This is very different from the for how many of you this method seems very different from what you have seen how to approach pre-thinking questions? Right, this is very different. Yeah, unless you're an e-GMAT student, then you know what it is. But for others, this probably seems very different. And the reason this is different is because the results that we deliver are very different. And one of the things I want you to do is go to GMAT Club, go to the review section, and look at how frequently our students report success stories and compare this to others and to validate this number. The reason I'm saying that is because to get such results, you've got to do things differently. And as you read those, you're going to really see people talk about pre-thinking. Okay. So here's the pre-thinking journey that you're going to go through. Let's say you are this guy who is, so just the axis here is the accuracy of questions, and here is the time to answer questions. Okay. Let's say you're this guy who starts at point number 1, where your accuracy to answer questions is low and the time to answer questions is about medium. And again, depending on who you are, these numbers could mean different things for you. So I've just given this, more, I would say, a logical representation rather than putting actual numbers over here. Okay. So the first thing that's going to happen when you start doing pre-thinking is, you're going to get more questions right, but you're also going to take longer to answer questions. And then you'll be like this guy saying, why the hell am I doing pre-thinking? I already worry about timing. This is taking me longer. To to answer questions. And then the surprising thing is people don't care about higher accuracy when it comes to timing. They really just worry about timing. And this probably has happened with you. You know, you really say, hey, why the hell am I doing this? If it's taking longer, am I right? You guys do that, right? You don't look when you something takes longer, you don't worry about, hey, I'm getting more questions, right? You really say it's taking longer, I'm going to mess up, right? I want you to trust, don't panic. I want you to trust that process. Okay. If you trust that process and you continue doing pre-thinking, a time will come when your time to answer questions is going to go down. You can see point number 3 is on the left hand side, but your accuracy will continue to go up. And at that point, you'll be like, I understand why pre-thinking works. Once you hit this point, then there's no one can stop you from doing pre-thinking. And then as you continue to do that, you're going to continue to reduce that time to answer questions. You're going to continue to get better. Now, a lot of people ask, what does it take? How long does it take to go from 1 to 3, or to go from 2 to 3? Because 1 to 2 is actually fairly simple. 2 to 3 is what takes longer. The answer depends on your willingness to visualize and your willingness to apply the process. There are people who get it in 3 days. And when I say 3 days, about 4 to 5 hours of effort. There are people who actually take 7 days. And there are people who actually fail once and then come back to us again and then they get it. And you're going to see all sorts of people. The answer depends on not, how difficult it is, because it is not. The answer depends on how willing you are and how much you spend time on reading the argument and visualizing. If you spend more time on reading the argument and visualizing, you're going to find pre-thinking becomes easier and easier and easier, and the time to go from 1 to 3 becomes shorter. So it's actually counterintuitive, where you say, hey, by spending more time, I'm actually going to solve questions faster. But in reality, that's what happens. The more time you spend up front, the less time you need you need later on. Why does this happen? Why do we spend time while solving CR questions? The reason why we take longer to solve CR questions is because we do back and forth between the answer choices and the argument, right? That's why we take longer to solve CR questions. You do that back and forth. What happens when you spend more time on the argument? You don't need to do that. Why? Because the logic that the author uses is there in your brain. So when you avoid that back and forth, you actually get to the answer fairly easily. So with pre-thinking, if you think about it, most CR arguments about 80 words. If you spend about 45 seconds reading the argument and another 15 seconds doing pre-thinking, once you become a skilled pre-thinker, then essentially you'll have ample time to solve the argument. Most likely it'll be done in a minute 30. However, when you start doing this tomorrow, you'll probably spend 2.5 minutes reading the argument. I want you to do that. I want you to slow down and visualize, because today you don't know how to visualize. So when you start visualizing, you're going to take longer. But then the more time you spend reading the argument and visualizing, the faster you get to pre-thinking. And you're going to find that the time required to visualize goes down considerably within 10 to 12 arguments. Okay. Here are people who've done this. He's a guy who scored 740. He says, understand the passage. Take your time. Equally important, pre-think and answer before looking at an answer choice. Probably this one word will have the most impact on your GMAT score. Okay. Here's a guy, Jim Yee, who scored 770. He got into Booth in Columbia, is currently studying at Booth. He says, answer CR questions as if there's no answer choices. Pre-thinking is a game changer. So this is a guy who scored 700 first, okay, and then he went to 770, and when he scored 700, his CR ability was 35th percentile, and then within 20, and he wasn't using pre-thinking, and in 20 days he improved to 770. His CR ability went from 35th to 95th percentile, if I remember correctly. His SC ability improved from 65th to 95th percentile as well. So that's how we went from a V34 to a V42. It says when it gets to 700 level questions, you have to pre-think. Why? Because that allows you to not deviate from the trap choices. Okay. Here's another guy who he says pre-thinking primes the mind, and we are constantly on our toes while reading a paragraph or a CR question stem. So pre-thinking is really useful also in reading comprehension. And then this guy went from a 520 in his mock test to 740 on the actual GMAT. You can actually, if you want to bookmark these stories, you can bookmark these stories. So Jim's number 2 over here. Karthik is another guy who benefited from pre-thinking. So, and you can see many of these are video interviews. Okay. So with that, let's now get to another example. This is the first full length question that we will do. And I'm going to give you the question. I want you to select the correct answer choice. Let me put in my poll question. Okay. Um, Here is the poll question. This is an official question. And it's a question that tells you the value of pre-thinking. Why? Because the argument's fairly simple. The answer choices are they seem very, very close to one another if you don't do pre-thinking. If you do pre-thinking, you should be able to get to the correct answer very easily. So here is the question. I'm going to give you guys 3 minutes to select the correct answer. Good luck, guys. Okay, get those answers in. 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. And I'm going to broadcast the results. Okay. So, and thank you, Ran. Uh, that's very, thank you for those for the generous comments. So essentially, you can see that this is something that some people got it absolutely correct while others were confused. And I'm going to actually put in a poll question here and say, simple yes no poll question, and I want you to tell me how many of you were confused once you looked at the answer choices. It says, man, every second choice seems to be correct. How many of you were confused? If select yes if you were confused, select no if you weren't. And again, remember, there's no right or wrong answer. If you're confused, you were confused. And you're going to learn something from the solution. If you were not confused, then congratulations. You've started on the right path. Okay. About 57% of you were confused and others weren't. And this is what makes it a hard question. I can't decide what makes a question hard, or when I create a question, the only way if I can figure out if that question is difficult or not is by doing statistical sampling. And this is an example of it where we have about 100 responses and only about, and you can see that the responses are split. Okay. So let's kind of look at the conclusion. Okay, so what's going on in this argument? We want to finance road repairs, and to do that, we want to get more money. How we get more money is by increasing the toll. And right now, the toll is 10 cents per mile. Okay, and then there's a highway commissioner who makes this claim and says that, hey, as we increase the toll, our overall annual revenue will go up by at least 50%. It could go up by 51, 52, 53, 54, 60, 80 or so. So let's visualize this conclusion. So the conclusion is annual revenue generated by the highway will go by at least 50%. So I'd really say, hey, if last year the annual revenue was 10 million, then this year it's going to be go 15 million. And if it was 100, then it'll be 150 and so on and so forth. That's just visualizing the conclusion. That's fairly simple. Okay, now let's go to the next piece. And now let's understand the argument. How do we estimate annual revenue? Let me put in a short answer poll. How do we estimate annual revenue? Can you guys tell me given the information in the argument? Okay, if you can put it over there, Ryan, it'd be great if you can put the answer in the short answer board. Yes, miles driven. What does that mean? Miles driven multiplied by, yes, total distance multiplied by rate per toll. Okay. When you think about what's given, annual revenue is toll per mile multiplied by the total number of toll miles. There are no trips that are given in the argument. If you look at, here's the argument on top for you. Are there any trips given in the argument? Do you see the word trips over there in the argument? No. So again, when you're doing pre-thinking, don't bring information from the answer choices into this. The answer choices are designed to mess you up. Okay? Right? Given the information in the argument, this is what you can come up with, that annual revenue is toll per mile multiplied by total number of toll miles. Okay. All right. This is where all of this, still the same pre-thinking question. Under what circumstances, given the facts in the argument, will the conclusion break down? And under what circumstances will the annual revenue not go up by 50%? So here, this number will not go up by 50%. Given that this is already up by 50%, we are going to make this up by 50%. What's the only scenario? And I saw one good answer, but let's kind of tell me, in what scenario will this not go up by 50% if this goes up, if you know that this entity is already gone up by 50%? What's the only scenario? If total miles were less, yes, if you were driving fewer miles, the total distance traveled goes down, right? It's as simple as that. This is what this argument was about. All right. The total number of miles decreases. Okay. So what's my assumption? The total number of miles traveled does not decrease. Okay. Everyone's with me? Everyone's with me? This is fairly simple. The argument part is very, very simple. And you guys got to the pre-thinking fairly easily. Let's talk about choice B, which is an incorrect answer choice. Okay. And there's a lot of information on this slide, so I'm going to start with this. Choice B says the total number of trips made on the toll highway will not decrease from its current level. And remember how we did the Joe will not get admission into an Ivy League college. So we're going to do this. If this information is true, then does this mean that the total number of miles traveled will go down if the total number of trips traveled go down? If let's say last year there were 1,000 trips and this year there are 900 trips, does it mean that the total number of miles traveled, will those go down? No, not really. Not necessarily. Why? Because what if those 900 trips, if everyone travels 20% more or 30% more, right? Not necessarily. Why? Because hey, if the number of miles per trip goes up, remember the annual revenue is toll per mile multiplied by the total number of toll miles. All right. So does this mean that this statement is a must be true? Does this mean that we require that the number of trips not go down? No, we don't require, right? And some of you are really saying, hey, but we don't know whether the length of trip will go up or not. Yes, we don't know that. But you have to understand what an assumption does. An assumption is a must be true statement. It says, is that absolutely required? And when you evaluate that and you find out that this is not required, this is a strengthener. It's not a weakener. It's a strengthener, but it's not an assumption. If this were a strengthened question, this information would have been correct. But this is not. This is an assumption question. Okay. So that's something that's there. And that's true for answer choices C and D as well, which were also good strengtheners. Choice E, which is the correct answer choice. Why not choice C? We're going to look at choice C. So let's look at the correct answer, which is choice E, and then I'm going to come to choice C. So good question. Okay. The total distance traveled by toll vehicles on the toll highway, it talks about the total distance. If the total distance comes down, will the revenue go down? Absolutely. Why? Because this is my formula for revenue. So which means this is a must be true. We can't have the total distance go down. Those of you who've chosen any other answer choice, first of all, I want you to forget about that answer choice and look at this and say, can you see why this is a must be true? Why this is required given how we generate annual revenue? And then I'm going to address your doubts. So forget about what you chose if you did not choose choice E for elephant, and tell me if you have any doubts on this. All right. Let's go to the other answer. The number of drivers who constantly avoid the highway by using secondary roads will not increase from its current level. Now let's assume right now about 1,000 drivers avoid the highway. And now that number goes up from 1,000 to, let's say, 1,200. Does it mean the total number of miles driven would go down if this happens? If earlier 1,000 drivers were avoiding the highway, now 1,200. No, not sure. Why? Because maybe the remaining drivers go for longer trips, which was the same logic that was over here, right? So this is not a must be true. Again, it is a strengthener, but not a must be true. And which is the same logic, but the average length of trip. What if the average length of trip goes down? What can compensate for the average length of trip? What can compensate for average length of trip that choice C talks about? C for cat. The number of trips, not number of users, the number of trips. Right? So again, choice C is not a must be true. Okay. Now, regardless of whether you got this right or wrong, what did you learn from this question? What did you learn from this question? What's your takeaway? Okay, do pre-thinking. Pre-thinking will lead to an answer. What else? Never look at options first. Yes, they pollute your brain. They take they mess up your logic. Okay. Analyze more. Spend more time on the argument. Read slowly. And the three-step process works. Now these two questions here, let me just give a disclaimer up front. These are difficult questions. All right. You might get them wrong, but 70% of people get them wrong. 30% of them get them right. So don't kill yourself if you get them wrong, because they are difficult questions. But the reason why I have them is because the learnings that you get from them. For example, from this particular question, many of you who weren't doing pre-thinking as precisely will probably start doing pre-thinking more precisely after this. Am I correct? You say, hey, let's give pre-thinking a shot. You're going to start doing that, right? Similarly, with these questions, I want to increase that belief that pre-thinking, even questions that are this difficult as you do pre-thinking, it crystallizes your thinking. All right. So 70% of you will get this wrong, but don't kill yourself for it, or don't kill me for it, by the way, because I think you'd be a better test taker if you focus on learning from this. All right. So with that, the previous question was 700 level. Half the people got it wrong. So actually 52% of it got it wrong. That's a 7. All of these questions here are 700 level, by the way. So now let's so the way I do the next two questions, because they're very difficult, is that I don't time you guys. You guys time yourself. So what we do, and this is something that we do in the quant as well, in the quant session, do we actually ask you to select this last choice called not answered. Okay, so I want about 40 people to select not answered. And that way, when you choose an answer choice other than not answered, I know you guys are done. And so I call time when 80% of you essentially choose an option other than not answered. Okay, so I'm going to remove broadcast results. So you guys probably can't see what others are seeing, but I see this dynamically. So with that, here is the next question. Remember, we're going to do questions 4 and 5 as a quiz, so one after the other, and then we're going to analyze them. All right, here is your first question. Good luck, guys. All right, guys, but 70% of the class is done. Get those answers in. Five, four, three, two, and one. Let me end the poll, and I'm going to broadcast the results. This is how you guys polled. Let's go to the next question, and then we'll analyze this. Let me put in the poll question, the poll for the next question. The next question is easier than this one, so you guys will probably like it. Let me reopen the poll. Again, the same thing. Click on not answered. I want about 40 people to click on not answered before I show the question. All right, good. That's good. Let me resize the poll so that your arguments not clouded. And here is the next question again. Good luck, guys. All right, guys, 80% of the class is done. Get those answers. Five, four, three, two, and one. Let me end the poll. Let's broadcast the results. All right, you can see, but the choices C and D are very popular. E is quite popular as well. And some of you think choice A is correct too. So with that, let's now discuss these questions. How do you guys feel right now? How do you feel? Sad, okay. Don't be sad. Nervous. Nervous is fine. Confident. Mind messed up is absolutely okay, because these questions are designed to mess up your mind. That's what makes them difficult. This question is particularly difficult, yes. And it's also beautiful. Again, as I said, don't judge yourself on these two questions. All right? I told you up front, don't judge yourself. These are 750. These are not 700. Okay. The goal for these questions was not that you would get them right. Again, you guys are not. The goal here is to really see how pre-thinking can cut through a question that's as difficult as this one. All right. I can tell you, half the experts at e-GMAT, when they solved this question the first time, they got this wrong. And these are people who do this full time. So don't kill yourself for this one. And these questions are meant to be for your learning. The actual questions, if you get this right, you're probably already at 97th percentile, or if you get such questions correct consistently, let me be correct, you're probably at 97th percentile already in critical reasoning. And the reason you are here is because you're not there yet. Otherwise, you won't be spending time with me today, right? So with that, let's kind of look at what's going on over here. So let's visualize the conclusion. We're going to start with visualizing the same basics over here. So when you look at this conclusion, you kind of observe a few things. First of all, it's talking about Verlanders. It's not talking about people who are outside of Verland. He's not talking about, where's my pen? Hold on. Let me just get my pen there. Yes. So this is, I have my pen. So he's talking about Verlanders, and he's talking about special program information. So programs that have that special program information, and it's talking about this time period, 94 to 96. And what this is saying is the number of people who receive special program information, they kind of remain the same more or less in this time period. So if there were about 10 million people in 94, there were 10 million in 96. Again, I like the word 10. I like to deal in millions. I love that. If you are from India and you deal in lakhs, you can say 10 lakhs, 10 lakhs. If you are from another place where another quantity is more prevalent, you could do that too. It's just putting some numbers over here. So let's understand this. This is my main conclusion. This is what the author wants to prove. He says the number of Verlanders who are receiving this, if they were 10 million in 94, they're 10 million in 96. Why does the author say that? There are two things that have happened between 94 and 96. One is the number of receiving radios where people on which people listen to these special programs, that has remained the same. So if there were 1 million radios in 94, there are 1 million radios in 96. But the number of transmitting stations, okay, that number has gone up from 250 to 600. That has more than doubled, but during this time. Now, you see the word however that's written to connect these two statements, which means that these two statements seem to go against each other. And we know that statement number 3 makes my conclusion stronger. This means statement number 2 goes against the conclusion. So this is an anti-premise or so. Okay. And statement number 1 helps me set the context, very similar to that tenured faculty argument where the first statement helps set the context. Here this is setting the context. It's saying that radio stations with RDS, so there's some special technology called RDS, broadcast special program information that only radios with an RDS feature can receive. So what this is saying is that, hey, if you want to receive that special feature or special program information, you need to have a transmitting radio station and a receiving radio for you to be able to enjoy this feature called special program information. Very similar to if you want to enjoy the 5G technology on phones, you need to have a 5G transmitting tower and your phone should have 5G technology. This is very, very similar to that. Okay. So just in terms of organizing this information more logically, this is how I create a visual map in my brain. I say, okay, to receive RDS programming, I need an RDS radio. I also need to be next to an RDS transmitting tower. Between 94 and 96, The number of radios in V remain almost the same. So, 1 million in 94, then 1 million in 96. The number of stations multiplied a lot. Okay. And based on this, what the author wants me to believe is, or what the author is claiming is, that very few additional Verlanders between 94 and 96 started receiving RDS programming or this special information. If that number was 10 million in 94, it's still at 10 million in 96. Are you guys with me so far? Is the argument simple and clear? Right? So we then ask this question: under what conditions will there be a significant addition to the number of people? Why? Because we want to falsify the argument, falsify the conclusion, to the number of people receiving RDS programming if we have very few additional radios and if we have a lot more transmitting stations. Okay. So how can we falsify this conclusion? How can we break down author's claim? How can we destroy his claim? Can you guys come up with some ideas? You can't do another way to get broadcast because then you're going against the facts in the argument. Okay. Have more radios. You can't have more radios. Again, you can't go against the facts in the argument. Okay. You can get more users per radio. Okay. If more people with a single radio, that would be there. Listeners outside of V can't come in. Why? Because the conclusion only worries about V. All right. If we increase the coverage range, that's another way. So if earlier people had 5G phones and essentially, but they didn't have a tower next to it. If the new towers are built so that they cover more of world land, then yes, some people who earlier had the radios but couldn't receive anything now are able to do that. There are two scenarios in which my conclusion is destroyed. One is if I put these additional stations or in areas where there was no coverage but where people did have RDS radios. Okay. Can everyone see that this one breaks the conclusion down? Or there's the same thing as transmitting to a section of users that was previously untapped. Yes, that's the same thing as one. Can you see that this breaks the conclusion down? Right? The second thing is if we start putting these radios in Starbucks, so the number of radios still remain the same, but you put them in higher traffic areas such as Starbucks, and so people per radio go up. That also breaks my conclusion down without breaking any of the constraints that the argument puts at me. Correct? So if both these scenarios break my conclusion, then, and you guys came up with these scenarios, but what if the information is received from somewhere else? Okay. That's a good one. That could also be, what if someone stationed outside do that? That's true too. That could also come in over here. Yes, I agree with that. Stations is not, if each station is accessible to, so more stations will be heard, not necessarily need more radios. Absolutely, that's there. So again, that's about adding the coverage piece over here. So if these are scenarios in which my conclusion breaks down, then what are my assumptions? That the new stations do not increase coverage, which means they don't really cover, a whole lot of people who had the right kind of radio but had no coverage earlier. And people per radio more or less remain the same. Both of them are valid assumptions. Are you guys with me so far? With these two assumptions, are you guys with me? Right? Now, when you do pre-thinking, that's where you cut through the clutter. Coming up with these was not as challenging as you thought, right? So now let's look at the answer choices, and the answer choices in this question, they really tell you the value of visualizing not just the conclusion, but also the answer choices. Okay. The correct answer in this is choice A. Choice A says few, if any, and we have to translate this into a simpler form. Few, if any, of RDS radio stations that began broadcasting after 94 broadcast to people who already had the RDS equipped radios but were not previously reached. So what this is saying is few if any means almost none, and of the RDS equipped radios that began broadcasting after 94, that's the new radio station, broadcast to people with RDS equipped radios living in areas not previously reached. That's about increasing the coverage of RDS programming, which means you're putting these radio stations in newer areas where there was no coverage earlier. Okay. So, and it's okay if you couldn't come up with the first pre-thinking, that's absolutely fine. But as long as you're able to come up with one pre-thinking, that's perfect. Okay. Now, can you see that this is in line with our first way? With our first pre-thinking, right? So which makes us the correct answer. Let's do the negation test on this and see how this breaks the argument down. Negated statement means that at least some of these new radio stations increase coverage. If at least some of these radio stations increase coverage, then the author cannot say with 100% certainty that the number of people receiving special program information hasn't changed, right? So the conclusion breaks, which further means that this is my correct answer choice. Congratulations if you got it right, but if you didn't get it right, think about which part of the analysis did you not do? Which step did you falter on? Did you not visualize the conclusion? Were you not able to put the information together? Or were you not able to pre-think, or did you not put the right falsification question? It took me 3 minutes. That's good. That's okay. This is a difficult question. Some questions will take you, remember. Are you supposed to list down every single scenario during pre-thinking? What do you guys think? What did I talk about early on in the session? No, only one. Okay. The answer is no. If you get to one, you're fine. You understand the logic that the author is using. The nice thing about this is, as you start listing down more and more scenarios, as you start solving more questions, other scenarios would start coming to you automatically. So you can't stop yourself. The moment you get the first one, the second one will also come. But you only need one. That's why I say you only need one. Here is how you guys polled. 21% of you got this right. Now choice B was really popular. And this is something that is also a reinforcement of the definition of what an assumption is. Oh, why did I hide that poll? I'm sorry. Let me bring that poll back. I need your feedback. Yes, we got the poll back here. Okay. Now, do you need to get more than one assumption? When you are in the learning mode, absolutely go for it. And this is where it's like, if you're practicing how to hit a cover drive, if you're practicing how to take a penalty kick, you want to do everything correct. Doesn't mean you've got to do it when you're playing the match. Now, most of it will happen automatically. Okay. Let's look at choice B. Choice B says, in 1996, most Verlanders listening to who were within the listening area of our RDS station already had a radio equipped to receive RDS. Now, can you guys tell me what's the conclusion here? What's the conclusion here? You want me to show the argument? I can show the argument, but I'm sure many of you now remember the conclusion. Here is the argument. What's the conclusion? The number of Verlanders did not who received special program information did not increase a whole lot between these 2 years. In other words, what we are saying is, if 1 million Verlanders were receiving special program information in 94, so if that number was 1 million in 1994, it's still 1 million in 1996, right? Do you guys agree? If it's 1 million in 94, it's still around that 1 million. It could be 1.05 million, it could be 995K, but more or less it's the same between these 2 years, right? You guys with me? Type in yes, guys, or type in no if you're not with me. Okay. All right. For the person who says it can't mean special program information cannot come from anywhere else, it does mean that, and let me explain why. There's RDS technology. You see the word only here? You see the word only here? Right? That's why. Yes. And again, that's this first statement sets the context. Now, tell me one thing, going back to this. If 1 million people were to receive special program information in 94, then 1 million and 1 million in 96, then do I need that a majority, which means 70% of landers, let's call majority as 70%, have who are within the coverage area, they should have an RDSF radio? Will this conclusion not be true if only 20% have? Would this not be true if only 20% had the RDS radio in 94 and 20% had the RDS radio in 96? Will that not be true? Guys, yeah, it's so. Do you require most? Is my question. Is that most must be true? Do you require that 70% of people have that in 94 versus 96? No. So does this satisfy the must be true test? No, it doesn't satisfy. In other words, the conclusion is about the change in number of people in between 94 and 96, and we are saying the change is not significant. It doesn't require that a majority have the radio in 94 or in 96. If 20% had in 94, 20% have in 96, we are still okay. Okay. Equipping a radio station with RDS technology does not decrease the station's listening area. This is, again, not relevant. Why? What kind of programming are we interested in? What kind of program are we interested in? Programming that has RDS information, right? RDS programming. Let's call it RDS programming. Okay, very simple. Now, if a radio station does not have RDS technology, can it broadcast RDS programming? If according to the, no, it cannot, which means if you don't have RDS technology, then what's the range of RDS programming? Zero, absolutely zero. So if equipping a radio station with RDS technology decreases the station's listening area, then is it impacting the RDS programming or the non-RDS programming? What kind of programming could it decrease the range of? Non-RDS, right? Non-RDS, because the range is zero. You can't reduce the range beyond zero. So do we care about non-RDS programming? Absolutely wrong. We don't care about non-RDS programming in my conclusion. Hence, this answer choice is irrelevant to me. Okay. Let's look at choice D. Choice D was really popular, and you know, had you just focused on the conclusion, you probably would have rejected choice D. Choice D says, in 1996, people who did not own radios to receive RDS. Do we care about people who don't own radios, the right kind of radios? Do we care about those folks? No. Could not receive any programming. Do we care about any programming? Do we care about any programming in my conclusion? No, I don't. It's irrelevant. From RDS radio stations, these are the new radio stations that began broadcasting after 94. We don't care about people who don't have the right kind of radio because according to the argument, they can't receive it. Okay. What if normal radios got equipped with RDS? How can they be? The argument doesn't tell you that. It's saying the number of RDS equipped radios in 94 and 96 was about the same. Do you see that? Do you see that? Okay, again, the argument has that information. Okay. So, wrong people, wrong programming, completely irrelevant. For people who chose this, a lot of you chose this answer choice. What made you choose this? Why did you choose this? Why was this so attractive? Did some of you choose this because it has words such as any and all of those which are told to you that, hey, when you have a word some, any, you typically choose an answer choice like that when you don't get anything? Was that going on in your mind? I mean, what made you choose this answer choice? Yes, RDS station can broadcast both RDS and non-RDS programs. Absolutely. Ah, you thought it implies the Starbucks example. Now can you see it doesn't? Okay, perfect. Any other reason why you chose this one? Again, this is learning, guys. This is value. If you got this right, then I'm not delivering value because for the right reasons, then congratulations to you. But the reason you got this wrong is the feedback. Okay. All right. And this is where visualization comes in. So now this is a fairly simple argument, actually very, very similar to the highway repairs argument over here. What are we trying to do here? We're trying to reduce the amount of residual ash that you have once you burn refuse or incinerators burning. Let me show you how you guys polled. Here is how you guys polled. You guys can, no, wrong poll, I'm sorry. Let's bring in the other poll. Shelby will refuse. Here is how you guys polled. Choice C, D, and E were popular. Let's look at this over here. So what was going on? Last year, we did not recycle anything. We sent everything for burning. So let's assume one truck is equal to one trash can. Okay, so how many trucks did we send for burning last year? Again, this is visualization. How many trucks did we send last year? Can you count the number of trash cans here? 10, right? This year, how many trucks are we going to send? How many trucks are we going to send this year based on the information in the argument? 5, half of what it was last year. If we sent 10 last year, then it's going to be 5. Now, here is my question to you, and this is something, the answer to this is given in the argument. Hold on. Why did we go forward? If instead of, all right, where is my poll question? Sorry about that, guys. Yes, here is my poll question. If instead of collecting the same amount of refuse, if the amount of refuse collected is 10 times, if I collect 10 times as much refuse, how many trucks do you think I'll be sending for incineration this year? Okay, let's get a few more responses. The question is, if I collect 10 times as much refuse, how many trucks do you think we'll be sending for incineration this year? 3, 2, and 1. Okay, let me end the poll and broadcast the results. And this shows, that deep understanding of argument. The correct answer for this is 5, still 5, even if you collect 100 trucks worth of refuse. And you can see about 46% of you selected choice D, and 46% of you would have gotten this question wrong because of this. And this is the games that language plays. This year, city services will separate for recycling enough refuse to reduce the number of truckloads to be incinerated to half of last year's number. What are we saying? If we sent 10 trucks last year, regardless of the amount of refuse that we collect, I'm only going to send 5 trucks. Can you see that when you read that statement? Right? And that's the beauty of language, and that's the beauty of visualization. How do you visualize this? Right, enough refuse is the key point over here. Yes, this is the key point. So Regardless of how much refuse we collect, we're going to separate enough so that you only get half as many truckloads. Now, if you only get half as many truckloads, what else is required for the conclusion to hold true? If you only get half as many truckloads, my conclusion is that the ash generated this year will be 50% of what it's last year, right? All right. So what's the only scenario in which I generate more ash? If the average ash generated per truckload is higher than what it was last year. If we stuff those trucks so much that they generate a ton more ash than what they did last year, right? So the assumption is the ash per truckload is similar to or less than what it was last year. Can you guys see this? Here is my falsification scenario, and here is the assumption that came out of it. Very simple. Once you understand the argument, this is very, very simple. Which means choice D is my correct answer. Why is that? Let's kind of look at each of the answer choices. Choice A says, this year, no materials at resources separate for recycling will be incinerated. Or in other words, what this is saying is recyclable material will not be burned down. And this is true, and you require that. The problem is, this information is already given in the argument. So even though this satisfies my must be true condition, the reason why this is wrong is because it doesn't provide any new information. You can infer that, okay? Choice B talks about cost. Not many of you talked about this, so we're not going to worry about it. Choice C talks about a larger proportion of recyclable materials, and it compares it to what it was last year. First of all, you don't know what it was last year. The second thing is, does it even matter? Given that I'm only going to send 5 truckloads for incineration, does that matter? No. Why? Because regardless of that proportion, I'm only getting half as many truckloads for incineration, and I'm been told that incineration generates ash. Choice C people, can you see why this is wrong? People who chose choice C. Okay, let's look at choice D and see why it's wrong. The refuse incinerated this year will generate no more residual ash per truckload incinerated than did the refuse last year. Really important. Why is that important? Because if you generate more ash per truckload, you will not reduce the amount of ash by 50%. The negated version is this: the refuse incinerated will generate more ash, which means my conclusion breaks down. Okay. Everyone, can you see why this is the correct answer? Can you see the negation test being applied over here? All right. And then choice E, total quantity of refuse. Yeah, choice E is total quantity of refuse. Doesn't matter. We already tried this case out. Why? Because I'm only going to send half as many truckloads. It seems very easy now. Why does it seem easy now? Because you visualized it, right? That's the power of visualization and following a process. You cut through the answer choices as long as you visualize them, and that's what you need to build. Okay. So what should you do next? What should you do next? What do you think you should do next? How are you going to change how you approach critical reasoning? Okay, practice more. I was looking for something more. Pre-thinking. What else? Okay, join e-GMAT, which you should. By the way, we have the end of month deal going, so for another couple of days. So if you're thinking about joining e-GMAT, that would be the time. You focus on keywords conclusion. All right. Forget the old style. Good. Don't start solving 750 level questions. You don't want to do that right away. Okay. All right. The first thing I want you to do is slow down and start visualizing. All right. Slow down and visualize. That's really, really important. Okay. So the thing that I want you to really look at this is that pre-thinking is not rocket science. And then as you do pre-thinking, as you slow down and you start visualizing, getting through the answer choices becomes easier, right? Would you agree? Once you did the pre-thinking, answer choices were much more simple. Yes, and that's what you want to achieve. So how do you get to that 90th percentile? Okay, so what does this mean? The ability to do this by yourself means that you have to start with the right fundamentals. Remember how when we looked at the argument, we said this is context, this statement, this is conclusion, this statement is supporting the conclusion, this one's going against. That is the ability to classify statements. That's really important. That's the first thing you've got to build. The second thing is to make sure that you learn how to separate the conclusion and then how to visualize the conclusion. That's really important over there. So you need to do 1 and 2. After that, you need to be able to pre-think, all right? And these are failure modes. These are also the skills that you need to build, right? Why? Because the reason you fail is because you don't build that skill, right? And then the last piece is you need to visualize the answer choice. Okay. When you make a mistake, even in this session, if you made a mistake, you would have made a mistake on one of these. This is what you need to learn first. This is what you need to learn next. And this is what you need to do after this. Okay. So this is really important because every CR argument based question will require this, whether it's assumption, evaluate, strengthen, weaken, logically completes, even bold-faced questions require that. Okay. And you need to have mastery on all of these to get to that 90th or 97th percentile. If you falter on any one of these, it reduces your chances of getting to that 97th percentile. Okay, so how do you build that? The goal really is you've got to achieve this mastery one step at a time. And I'm going to really show you an account of a person who's at 97 percentile. So this is any e-GMAT student over here? Any e-GMAT student, current student here? So this is what you call as a screenshot of a Scholaranium platform where you go into the second or third stage of learning. And this is a student who is at about that 95th percentile in critical reasoning. You see, I've selected hard questions. I've looked at last 20 and you can see the accuracy in SC and CR about 65th percentage. What I want to tell you is even people who are at that 95th percentile actually get about 20 to 30% questions wrong when they are hard questions. If I were to select that medium level, this number will get to about 90 to 92%. If I were to select easy, most likely it'll be again 97, 98. And so you will still make mistakes, but to get to that 65% accuracy in hard questions, you need to be able to do this. Now, what does it take? This is her account of learning. So the foundations over here. There are two things that you would observe. One is, how well she did in these files. And the second is that she spent about 2.5 hours just learning the foundation, 2.5 hours just doing this. Why is that important? Why? Because when you have the right foundation, and then getting the right foundation requires that you go through all the possible argument structures, then you can be much more confident as you move forward. Okay. Then ability to visualize the conclusion. That's where what you really see in the first set of files in module 4, which is the assumption module. And this is also actually module 3. This is the free trial screenshot, and this is something that's available to you in the free trial. And again, you can see how much time she spent on these files. Some of you were asking how much effort will it take. This is quantifying that effort, and look at the quality that she did with. So every activity, remember we said we follow a private tutoring based architecture. Yeah, this is for a student. Yes, this is an attempted account for the student who was at 97 percentile or so. What you see is the amount of effort it takes to get there, and the quality with which that effort is. I said earlier, we follow a private tutoring architecture. One of the hallmarks of that architecture is this feedback that we provide and this tracking that we do. This is not the time, the length of the video. This is how much time she spent. And depending on your natural strengths and weaknesses, you may spend less time or you may spend longer. For me, this clearly shows that in logical gaps, she actually struggled a bit more, which is why she spent 94 minutes, because this file is about 40 odd minutes long.
Here, she didn't struggle as much early on, and that's where, when you build that understanding, as you move forward, you don't spend as much time. Okay. Um, so this part, some of this is in the free trial. So if you're not a paid student, that's where you would go. This is the entire assumption module for her. And essentially what you do is you learn pre-thinking for logical gap type arguments, two entities time arguments, segments, arguments that compare multiple things, and then quant focus where you have to play with numbers. Okay, these are where you learn pre-thinking, and that's where you build that skill of pre-thinking. And then we have a set of application files which mix all of these together, and then you have a set of practice files here. Okay, you can see, you were asking that question, how long does it take to do that? You can see the amount of effort that this student puts in. Now this effort needs to be put continuously. You can't really just do this for 2 days and then really go away for 5 days and then come back and then start resume that. Don't assume that that's going to work. The skill building requires consistent effort, where you are focused on learning and you're not watching YouTube when you start this file. Okay. And this is where you see the tracking. Okay. And that's where you go from learning the fundamentals to learning, how to identify and visualize the conclusion, to doing pre-thinking, and to understanding answer choices. I mean, throughout these files, you'll probably go through about 50 arguments just for assumption. Okay. Then you go through evaluate, then you go through strengthen, weaken, logically complete, and fill in the blank kind of questions, and then you go through boldface. And then each one of these, you have feedback. Each one of these, we track how much time you spend. And this is just the learning part of it. Scholarinium, all that practice on Scholarinium happens after that. Okay, this is just the learning part. So here's a guy who actually went from 570 to 740. I think he's now in INSEAD. He says, as someone who taught physics at an undergraduate level, I thought I had a very good grasp on logic. But because of the fact that he wasn't visualizing, he would actually get questions wrong. And then he says, just spending that extra 5 to 10 seconds trained me to ask those questions, to think about along the question that you made me to ask, enough to overcome most of those traps. Now, one of the things that pre-thinking does is, because you've got to do this before looking at answer choices, it makes you visualize. And for the person who says, I'm getting very low accuracy, what should I do? Learn to visualize. Start from the very basics. There's a reason why you get low accuracy. You're faltering here or here or here. Figure out where you're faltering and then fix that. Okay. So as next steps, start your pre-thinking journey, go through these files. They are there as a part of your free trial. But, and trust me, you can do this in 10 days. But 10 days or about 25 to 30 hours. Okay. With that, I've come to the end of the session. Thank you very much. If I can get some feedback on the session. Revision, practice in Scholarinium, yes. Start with cementing quizzes in Scholarinium, but only after you're done with the course. And again, attend our onboarding sessions for paid students. That will tell you exactly how to go about doing this. Okay. So feedback on the session. Yes, I'm going to give you the PDF of these slides. Let me share the PDF. Here's the PDF on the top left-hand corner. I'm also going to. So this is the deal. This was the 4th of July deal. That the current deal that we are offering is very similar. This was, again, as we offer deals towards the end of the month or beginning of the month. So if you download the 4th of July deal, you should be able to see the brochure. I think the data in this is probably data from last month, but yeah, it's actually, but you can use that to get a deal on the course. Again, this ends this Sunday. How important is it to practice questions every day? So let's kind of go back into how at e-GMAT we think about your learning. We think about your learning in three stages, where we say in the first stage you learn, and with Ash, with Anshi, this is also to answer your question. So we think of learning in three stages. In the first stage, you go through the course, and we call this learning as learn concepts and methods. And if you go through the course, go through all the activities, the course gives you all the practice you need. We don't want you to deviate from the course itself. And that's something which will require about, depending on your starting ability, anywhere from 26 hours to about 40 hours in the CR course. So that's stage one, and that's the most crucial stage. Then stage two is what we call as cementing. That's where you go into Scholaranium, and we have these special cementing quizzes that are designed where we first do a medium cementing quiz, get 70% or higher accuracy on three of them, and then you do a hard cementing quiz and get 55% or higher accuracy on three hard cementing quiz. Most people go through this cycle in 3 days, and so once you're done with this, then that process of pre-thinking is then imbibed in your mind. After that, you don't need to practice CR questions every day. Okay, so that's what you need to do. So that's with Anshi, that's how you're gonna do that. Okay. Okay, the question, please put the question in the Q&A pod. It just helps me. I can't track your comments and your questions overall. Getting low accuracy on concept style, do you go ahead? Absolutely not. No. All right. Custom versus cementing quizzes. So again, let's go back to Chaitanya. Chaitanya is asking question, custom versus cementing quizzes. So again, the three stages of learning. Stage one, go through the course. Stage two, finish cementing. After you're done with cementing, you still have some weaknesses left, and that's where Scholaranium starts. Post the cementing quizzes. As you look at block level analysis within Scholaranium, you'll see which blocks you need to work on. And that's where we create those hyper-specific improvement plans. And where we actually tell you focus on these areas, and that's what helps you go from that 75th percentile to that 95th percentile. And when you do that those hyper specific improvement plans, that's where you take the custom quiz, and that's where the custom quiz engine is built for in Scholaranium. Okay. Do we have any RC session coming soon? Yes, we do. I think we have one in a couple of weeks, if I remember. Okay. Otherwise, we have a recording of our RC session on our YouTube channel. Okay. By the way, let me put in a yes/no poll over here. How many of you are subscribed to our YouTube channel? Let me just put in the poll. If you're not subscribed, you do subscribe, and you'll see those three stages of learning play out as you watch those interviews, as to how, towards the end, we build those hyper specific improvement plans for you that help you go from that 680 to that 750 score. Let me bring in the links to YouTube channel as well. Here are the links to our YouTube channel, top right hand corner. Okay, I'm going to move this away. Krishna says, when do you move from one subsection to another, for example, SC to CR? Krishna, the moment you're done with cementing, you're free to move. So there we give you a choice. You say, do you want to just spend a couple of days and refine your ability to that 95th percentile? Or are you okay if you want to move from one subsection to the other? So yes, only after achieving the minimum scores of stage 2. Now, some people actually go to refinement as well, but our requirement is only after you achieve those minimum scores, Krishna. In medium and hard cementing quizzes, because then we know you won't have to go through a majority of the course. The process is cemented in your brain. We have evidence that both timing and the process are cementing. Okay. If you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel, the first link over there helps you do that. And the reason why I want you to do that is because you see those 2 success stories being posted every week. We are right now have about, I think, 175 success stories over there. It's the world's largest collection of success stories, and these are unedited journeys of people that you have. And essentially, what you are struggling through is what these people struggled through some time back. And you can see the decisions they took, how they planned, how they found time from their day, how they talk to their spouses or their boyfriends, their girlfriends with regards to, hey, why you need time, how the role that parent support played, how the hyper specific plans help them get to that 680 to 750, and so on and so forth. So, and all of those are really important. If you want a companion during your GMAT journey, this is probably the best companion and the most regular companion that you can get. And the other thing which is there is on our YouTube channel, we've now started inviting these our alumni who are now in business school. Some of them actually have graduated. They're now working for McKinsey, Google, Microsoft, and those journeys are very inspiring too, because we give you the entire profile of the student, and you really said this is what this guy was doing early on, and this is what he is doing now. So you have people who were working in oil and gas industry prior to their MBA, did their MBA, and now are working in private equity, or are now working for Morgan Stanley, or doing venture capital for Bank of America, for example. And that's kind of an inspiring journey overall. And these are, because these are all alumni, they're very candid about um, essentially stuff such as, okay, it's like, hey, I'm making 10 times as much money as I was making prior to my MBA, or how an MBA transformed their life, and what they loved about their schools, what they did not like about their schools, what does Columbia care for, what does Stanford care for, Harvard care for, and this is stuff that you probably won't find anywhere else. Okay. And for those of you who were asking for my LinkedIn, here's the link to my LinkedIn as well. Okay. With that, I want to thank you guys. If there are no other questions, I want to thank you guys for joining me today. It was a pleasure hosting this webinar. As I said, I always look forward to hosting this webinar. It's just a lot of fun. I love critical reasoning as a subject. So thank you for joining me, and thank you for spending your time with me. With that, happy learning. And again, if you're looking to buy, be on the lookout for the deal. This is the only time we offer this deal. So yeah, with that, continue to learn, push towards that high GMAT score, and towards that MBA dream. Happy learning.